today's interview, I would like to, it gives me great pleasure, in fact, to welcome Steph Penny, who is the author of the Surviving series of books. She is also a generally multi-talented person, being also a blogger, prolific blogger, a social media personality, and a fantastic musician, as we'll discuss later. And in your spare time, you say you do psychology. Is that
that's right.
that's the full range of your talents, which is amazing. So in the Surviving series, I understand the latest book which is being released is Surviving Childlessness.
Yep.
And I was wondering if you would...
My new baby.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. There will be a link below the video as well to all your books and your presence and everything. Surviving childlessness really comes out of your personal experience, I believe. So I was wondering if you would mind telling us about your experience of childlessness.
Absolutely, Matt. And first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be doing this online over Zoom. Cool. Of course, we're all Zoom experts now, so I very much appreciate you having me. And absolutely, the idea of this book was birthed out of my own experience of childlessness. It actually sort of started with my first book in the survival series, which is all about surviving singledom. And at that book launch, a number of people approached me and said, would you, what's your second book going to be about? Could you write about marriage? And I thought, oh no, do you know how many books are out there about marriage?
Really?
No, I don't. I don't think I really want to do that. Not an expert on marriage or anything.
Who is?
But I know, right? But a couple of friends sort of took me aside and said, no, Steph, we don't want you to write about marriage. We want you to write about what it's like to be married in the church without children. And I thought, oh, right. Now that's something I can certainly speak to. Even before meeting my husband, we met quite late. And I don't mean late relative to society. We met when we were 29. That's not late. But in the church, it seems to be extraordinarily late, or in the churches we were part of. So I'd been, I guess, a little bit on the fence in terms of children. I thought, gee, if I'm not going to meet anybody, what's the point even thinking about the children kind of stage of life? Never been super maternal, anything like that. But I met my husband and suddenly it started to come together and I went, yeah, I can definitely see us together having children and starting our own family. So we started planning. We actually spent some time researching and very carefully selecting some names for our children to be. It was a beautiful process, as many people do, right? This is what you do. You put dreams together, you put hopes together, you can visualize it. And then I'd been sick for a little bit on and off with some really weird symptoms. And 2 years into the marriage, which I talk about in the book in a bit more detail, I got diagnosed with a chronic illness. And part of what that illness carries is, I guess, some heightened risk factors in terms of the blood in the body, which means that it can affect pregnancy and it rapidly increases the rate of miscarriage as well. And so when we put it all together, we thought, oh, let's do a little bit of research about how bad the risk of miscarriage is. Anyway, we found out it was quite bad. Okay. So we found ourselves in a position, we weren't exactly forced to not have children. It was, we felt that we weren't quite childless, not by choice, because we hadn't tried to conceive, we weren't found to be infertile or anything, but we found ourselves backed into a corner by this terrifying medical risk. And so we decided, look, we just can't, we can't risk this to me, we can't risk it to our future children. It could have been really quite bad. Right. And so we found ourselves being childless by what I've come to call forced choice, childlessness by forced choice.
Yes, it's a very
And
interesting distinction, because these
yeah,
boundaries that people set up in the childlessness domain are often quite blurred. People's lives are very complicated, and there can be any
indeed,
number of
indeed.
factors that lead to these
Exactly right,
situations.
Matt. And sometimes our stories are a little bit more nuanced than
Mm,
childless not by choice or childless by circumstance.
yes,
Those terms do fit for a lot of people.
sure.
And in fact, one childless friend I spoke to said, "Oh, Steph, you're childless by circumstance because, your medical illness is a unique circumstance."
Sure.
And while she's totally right, I went away from that conversation going, but it doesn't quite fit for those of us who felt that we could have chosen to try, but we also felt the choice was effectively taken out of our hands.
Right.
So this became our journey of childlessness by forced choice. And I feel like it's a term that can really suit people who perhaps are living with, maybe not with infertility, but maybe with some kind of medical illness like myself, or a disability, or perhaps a mental health issue, or something in their past, something in their history or in their family genes or their situation, living with the effects of trauma.
I think
And
that's
people,
very true. And the more
mm,
that medical science does provide people with insights into their own medical history and the risks, I think the more this kind of situation is going to arise, where people are extremely worried, and it feels like a dangerous gamble in some way to proceed, or to
yeah,
push
yeah,
for getting pregnant.
yes. Yes, and I want to say, having said that, I do want to qualify that by saying that some people who aren't me face a similar terrifying medical risk and decide to try for children anyway. So for some people, that risk isn't such a mitigating factor
Mm,
in their situation. So I do want to say that, I know people who've had not childless people, but others who've had
mm,
medical risk, and they've gone on to have children with, say, Down syndrome or with other high needs, lifelong needs situations,
mm.
and they've been so blessed by that. So I do want to say that having a forced choice situation, it doesn't mean that you should choose childlessness, but
Sure.
some people do feel, I guess, like I did, that we were kind of backed into a corner and that the choice was effectively taken out of our hands.
Yes.
So since that happened, we've experienced varying levels of grief around different kinds of situations, both in church and outside of the church, in the workplace and just in society at large, which we can talk about some more, I
Yeah,
guess. But yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you've hinted a couple of times that you sometimes feel there's a degree of friction between being a childless person and the way you're received, perhaps within the church, and perhaps the way people perceive your motives of being childless
yes,
a
yes,
couple.
and
But
perhaps,
I know from my
mm,
own perspective, I strongly feel that you know even though my wife and I are childless, not by choice, and I don't set that up as a sort of morally superior state, but it's just a fact. Um,
yeah,
the assumption is often, you can tell that people are assuming that you've in some way chosen to be childless, and there's a sort of reticence about being involved with that. Perhaps, I mean, I
yes.
have to say it has been quite difficult to get people to contribute to this conference, and I suspected that it may be something to do with it, But sorry, I interrupted. Has
Yes,
it been
yes.
your sort of experience as well, that there's this friction with church communities sometimes on several levels?
I've had a very mixed experience.
Mm,
Some of my experience has been really, really good. And I do want to say that at the outset, because my book does highlight some of the worst experiences I've had. Um, but I include them in the book because without those bad experiences, if I had only had positive and warm and welcoming experiences in the church, there'd be no need for a book like this.
Yes.
But it's because I've had some of the bad and the ugly, as well as the good, that I saw the need to write the book. But yes, certainly some of my experiences have been very warm and welcoming. Our current church is absolutely beautiful. I couldn't ask for a better spiritual family. But unfortunately, in churches past, there's been, as you say, I guess a lot of assumptions or a lot of kind of layers underneath the conversation around what people might be assuming about me as a childless woman, particularly as a childless woman. I've found there are certain assumptions around, you know, women once they're married need to become baby making machines. And I know that's not everyone's experience. That's cool. I hope watchers never have that experience, but I've certainly encountered it explicitly. Been told by both men and women in the church that no, a woman's job is to make babies and to be a homemaker. Yes. And I'm like, well, as a professional then, am I screwed for good? Does that mean my salvation's compromised? What if I can't have children? What if, so it raised a lot of interesting what if questions for me.
I think one of the major sort of friction points for childlessness, childless people is where the decision to accept and move on, or are you going to, as it were, abide in that uncertain state where you don't know, you know, you're praying obviously for children and trusting in God, but you know, you can see all the complexities. Moving on and saying I now have a different mission in life feels a little bit like not trusting in God, or can be perceived that way. And
yes,
has that been something that you've had to navigate?
For us, the decision was pretty clear cut once we'd done our research and we felt we were medically informed about my illness. That, having said that, as I say that out loud, I'm actually rethinking what I'm saying and going, you know what though, there were conversations, there were times when we revisited that and went, are we sure? Like, are we really, do we want to have another look at this? Do we want to have another conversation? So there was, I guess, this kind of transitional period. And some of it was shock too. Some of it was like, I can't believe we're not going to have kids. I can't believe this is this our life now? Like what?
I agree. There's
what do we do
often
with that?
sort of several stages where reality kicks in. It can feel like a sort of a hypothetical, or you're sort of having you know, sort of playing slightly mind games with yourself, and you think, well, you know, we're not really trying, but hopefully something will happen, you know.
And then you second guess.
It's very interesting what you describe, these reality moments, and it's actually real. We're not going to have children.
And I think that's part of the grief that is ongoing. In the book, I talk about this grief without end. And it doesn't mean that, you know, we haven't done the work or we haven't processed or haven't grieved. But every now and again, there's like a fresh reality check that can kind of come out of left field. It can sort of ambush us, it lying in wait, and then it hits us square between the eyes. And all of a sudden we're faced with yet another reality of, oh, right, I forgot this is what it means to be childless now. That stinks. I don't like that. I really hate that.
I mean, I don't know, it's sort of small things, but you know, they do sort of ambush you, these situations. We're lucky enough to have a garden, and you know, I was we're sort of re-landscaping, and I was trying to sort of decide what to put where, and I thought, it just occurred to me, like, this particular area would be great for a playground, you know, but so the sort of poignant moments like that come along, but
I feel that.
So, but you've obviously put a huge amount of conscious effort into the moving on and finding a different purpose, a different meaning to your life. And you know, I'm guessing that the survival books are part of that conscious moving on and creativity and purpose and so on.
Definitely. It's actually been a real blessing and a kindness from God, I think, to be able to write about it. I think that we've all got a story to share, and our stories, even though they contain similar or common threads, common themes, they're also quite unique, and they're all nuanced in a slightly different way. And I think that story that we carry is worth sharing. Because I think a lot of us childless people, whether we're in church or not, we can be left feeling a bit like we're on the outer of society or on the outer of the mainstream. And that it feels very isolating. It can feel like we're being excluded, even if it's not intentional on the part of others. It can certainly feel that way. So I really wanted to write a book that kind of started to bridge some of that gap, started to show that, hey, you're not alone. Like, you're not the only one that's experienced these things. You're not the only one that feels this way and that feels, ambushed by grief, and you're wrestling with this grief without ending. And what kind of life do I now create for myself? That whole reinvention stuff.
I think that thing of having your voice and your story heard and acknowledged is extremely powerful. For anyone who's in any kind of difficult circumstances, but particularly in circumstances where it can isolate you a bit from regular ways that people relate to one another. And so I wanted to ask, it occurs to me that it would be interesting to talk about, how you approached writing a book, because for many people, I think, it would seem like a really big and daunting thing, and it is truly an impressive thing to do, but you've clearly got the whole writing books thing off pat. And so I was wondering if you could sort of give people, for somebody who has not written a book and might be daunted by it, but has a story to tell, how should they approach that?
It's my hope that in sharing my story and in writing a book, that others might be inspired and maybe prompted to share their story. Not necessarily a book, or if you feel like you've got a book in you, please, go for it. But even just to share your story, whether it be with people you love and trust, or maybe on social media, or maybe by supporting other childless people who are doing that. And in fact, I believe in that so strongly, Matt, that when I put this book together, I interviewed 13 other childless people, and I've included their stories in my book as well, because I didn't want it just to be the Steffi show.
Yes.
I wanted it to be more about this others are also facing, and this is how they're surviving. This is how they're doing it. So when it came to writing this book, one of the first things I did, Matt, was I put the word out and said, hey, does anyone want to share their story for a book? And to my complete astonishment, people were so keen to talk about what had happened to them. It was almost like perhaps no one had ever asked before, or they'd never shared, I'm not sure, but it was so great. So when it came time to write this book, it took me 5 years to put the whole thing together. And I guess I never struggled to write it because it's something I'm really passionate about. And I think for people who struggle to write, or they're not sure where to start, for me, it's all about the passion. If you're passionate about something, I've never had writer's block, because I'm so passionate about it. It's like, I can't shut up about it. I can't stop, unsubscribe if you get sick of this, because I'm not going to stop, So that's really my
absolutely
pro
I agree. Just find something where you just have to say it. It's not a struggle. That's absolutely key to it. But also, I think kind of learning to just turn off your internal editor, if you like, and just write and then fix it later. And of course, with a book doesn't have to be like 400 pages. It can be like something that you've written for circulation among friends and that kind of thing, a much shorter affair. But it's
absolutely,
I think
in fact,
there's
the shorter the better.
magic to putting your words in between covers, and saying, that's my story.
It's been very special. And yes, I'm also writing blogs each week, and I write songs as well. There's something unique about a book.
Give us a sort of picture of how your creative life works. I mean, you're a musician, are you? You're clearly trained in some way, and that's an important outlet. What place does it actually have in your sort of creative life?
It's interesting when you use the word trained, because you might laugh, people might laugh at this, but this is my story of music. I wasn't a muso growing up. I've always been a singer, always loved to sing, and especially singing to God. So that's been there from like day dot, but never been a muso, and in fact always kind of terrified of instruments. One day Holy Spirit started drawing me to the piano, and not a word of a lie. Like before that day I'd been like, anti kind of keep me away. But one day a person prayed for me and it changed. I began to feel this strange pull towards pianos and keyboards, and I started fiddling around. I knew a bit of music theory from school, so I just started to put it together, and then the Holy Spirit would kind of whisper things like, why don't you try that up here? Or maybe try with both hands at the same time. Why don't you throw this chord in between? Why don't you maybe try this one? And he still does that. When I'm listening, he still whispers things about, Steph, why don't you try playing that melody right now? Do it now on the spot while you're playing live at church. So that's fun. But really, it was totally a Holy Spirit thing. And since then, I've helped out in my local churches with the worship there, but I've also toyed around a lot with songwriting. And it's something that it's always been an outlet for me, a way of expressing what's going on inside. But it's also a way of, I guess, wrestling with really difficult themes and wrestling with mysteries. You know how there's a bunch of stuff in life that doesn't have an answer?
Sure.
Those things.
Absolutely.
The really huge mysteries, the stuff where you're like, when I get to heaven, me and God are going to sit down and have words about that. So the thing I love about songs is that if you listen to a lot of songs, there's songs out there that don't have a happy ending necessarily, or they don't provide an answer, or there's no sort of resolution. A song can be like a piece of art. It can be to explore a theme and to unpack it and to feel it without necessarily having to come up with a pat answer in the end, without having to form a conclusion. Absolutely. So that's one thing I love about music, is that I can express what's going on inside without it really having to be terribly logical. So the most recent example of this, I'm hoping to be able to put this together soon, but I had a moment of grief around my childlessness. All of a sudden I could visualize an image of my daughter, who I never saw in real life, never met her, but I could visualize her, and she was sitting at my keyboard and we were playing together, and it hit me right there. I thought, oh, that's something I would have loved to have passed on, a legacy, something to have shared. So I sat down at the keyboard and I just started to play what I was feeling. And I wrote a song in about 10 minutes, and it's called Angel at My Keyboard, and it's for her. So that song doesn't have a nice, happy ending to it. It's more about, I'm feeling this right now, and it's okay. It's okay to feel this. It's okay to grieve. It's okay to ask why. It's okay to complain every now and again and go, you know what, this really wasn't fair. This isn't okay.
And
to feel that.
I mean, it clearly is important for you, but it's just as important for people listening. I mean, it's important for me listening to your music, but these songs, they encompass this complex thing that you wouldn't be able to put into words, and just listening to them does give you a sense of that thing that we've been mentioning today about being acknowledged and known and understood. Your blogging activity is very much of the same kind. I think it's extremely relatable, and you're very open. How long has that been running now?
Oh, so I started tooling around with blogging when my first book was launched. So that would be about 5 years.
Is it something that takes up a lot of your time?
Blogging, no. Blogging just tends to roll off the tongue, as it were. Most weeks. Sometimes I sit down to blog. I have every Friday off, so that's my writing day. That's sacred. So often when I sit down to write of a Friday morning, there's this moment of, okay, God, I don't have a blog pre-prepared for today.
Yeah.
What shall we do? What's next?
I think the great thing about the many of the things you do, I mean, the blogging and the being so present on social media is that you never know who is going to encounter those things, who's going to pick up your book, who's going to bump into your blog article, and how it's going to connect with people. But it's just a sort of overflowing of your generosity and creativity, and I think very, very important.
And passion and outspokenness.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that I'm mindful of when I do write and when I do publish things and put them out there in the universe. I'm super aware of the fact that I will never know if anyone reads or listens to it, unless people comment, and people don't comment all the time, which is fine.
Do you find that it really is slightly frustrating in a way?
No, God has been absolutely clear with me. He's taken me by the scruff of the neck and said, you will never be popular. You will never be a bestseller. So because I haven't wired you to be that way, I've wired you to be a bit weird, a bit quirky, and a bit kind of left of center. And you're an outsider, because those are the people that you need to write for. So you're always going to be writing for a niche group of people. So he's sorted me out in that respect. So no, I never go into this expecting feedback or expecting sales or anything like that. But my prayer is always
message. Sorry, Karen.
Well, no, I have no illusions about that. Not going to be a bestseller.
Helping people to find their sort of creative niche, as it were, is really kind of difficult, because it's the danger is that people feel that they're not entitled to write because they're not going to be a bestseller. They're not, or they don't think of themselves as a word person, or they're not entitled to put songs on the internet. If they don't think they're a kind of super talented musician, and but that's such a fantastic message. Go for it. Go for the thing that makes you feel most creative, where it flows. I love that word, flow.
Flow, it's a great word. My prayer when I put a blog out or a song out or a book, and in fact each time I post, even if it's about chocolate cake or my little fur baby, my prayer is always, God, would you just take this message, which is your message, and just put it in the hands of whoever needs that message right now, God. And it might be a different person each time. It's not always the same person that needs to hear all the Steffi rants. But that's my prayer and my hope, is that this isn't really kind of my book or my blog or my music. It's all come from God anyway. Everything I have is literally come from him. Each breath is from him. So it all goes back to him. It's all for him and for his people.
Do you bring your creative work to God in prayer time, or is the creative work itself also prayerful?
I don't really have a pat answer for that. It's kind of organic, I think.
Okay.
I don't really do structured boundaries. Prayer times. I'm not super structured in that way. But I always meet God in music. That's always a way when life has been really hard and when my faith has been affected by things. There's been time when my faith has not been good. But for some weird reason, music seems to stay anchored when everything else comes loose. And now same with writing. Now that writing is in my life, when everything else is going to poo, writing and music, that's a nice word, isn't it? Writing and music are like the only things that kind of go right, when everything else is wrong. And I was commenting to a writer friend of mine and saying, like at that time, everything was just going to poo. The job was pooey, and my health was pooey, and it kind of everything was just, a big pile of manure. And then I kind of ran out of breath, and I looked at her and said, you know what though? Writing is going great. It's all fuel for the writing fire. And she said to me, that sounds like God's kindness to me.
Really?
And I went, imagine that, like in the middle of such horrible states, there's something like music or writing in my life that kind of keeps me afloat. It's like a lifeline, or one of those boy things. I can't remember what, the life ring thing.
Yeah.
I'm really good with words. Yeah. It's like a lifeline. So there's been times when, yes, that creativity is a way of expressing what's going on, and a way of encouraging others and reaching others, and hopefully bringing inspiration to others as well.
Definitely.
But other times that's me sort of staying afloat. That's me meeting God in that space and not necessarily having lots of words, but just being with him.
It can be quite difficult for creative people to let go, because by and large, I think there's a feeling that you have to be in control of your material. You have to,
really
decide. Well, there's two. I don't know. With writing, which is my thing, like fiction writing. They talk about
that's a myth.
planners and pantsers. And pantsers is like going by the seat of your pants.
Yes.
And, so there are people, there's at least 50% of people who are like much more comfortable with that, kind of improvising and, improvise and overcome type approach. And well, let's say seeing where the material leads you and seeing that as an ongoing process. And then the other half, which is where people who need to plan down to the last detail. And I guess there's also equivalents in other sort of creative arts, but I think perhaps the pantsers may be closer to what's required if you're offering it up to God and letting God have his way.
Well, the thing I've learned about God is that he kind of uses whatever personality quirks we have, and he meets us in those spaces. I'm a bit, I don't know that I'm either a pantser or a plotter. I like having a plan, but my plan is like really, really loose.
Okay. Yeah.
So when I plan a book, I draw up a basic outline. It's like a table of contents, right? These are the really big topics I want to cover. Boom, boom, boom. And then that's it. I just sit down and I'll pick a chapter and go, that one looks interesting today. I'm feeling the energy with that. I'm feeling passionate. Got some ideas starting to burn. Let's write that one. So I just kind of go
really
with that flow.
Important learnings for people that, kind of breaking it down into the subject headings, but not getting hung up on those areas. If writing books is one of your aims in life, this is good information. And also the other thing you said there, which is great information, I think, is work on the bit that you can get really enthusiastic about today and now, where you can get that flow going right now, here and now. Fantastic.
Well, I believe in it not being torture, so pick the bit that's easy and do that.
Yes.
That's my philosophy. But at the same time, being prepared to cut stuff that's not working. When I originally wrote this book, it had 4 extra chapters than what it's got now. So I received some really great feedback from some very loving, honest friends who were helping me with the book, and I cut 4 chapters out of it. Even though they'd been in my plan from the beginning, the plan had to change because as the book organically formed, it took a different direction to what I was originally thinking.
Yes.
And in the end, those 4 chapters didn't belong.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's part of what the kind of pantser has to live with, is that it requires these acts of bravery to go out on a limb or throw stuff away that you're proud of, and it's
an act of faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And so creative work is obviously something that you're sending energy out into the world, but it also gives you a great deal of energy, and it supports and it inspires you. And what else feeds your relationship with God? Because sometimes childless people, it can be a troubled relationship.
No, it's an excellent question, and it's a question I feel really passionately about, because in the process of interviewing people for my book, it came up again and again that people's faith had been really badly affected by childlessness. And some people were kind of sort of slowly, gradually working away at their relationship with God, and others had walked away altogether. Others were sort of experimenting with returning to church, or maybe rekindling some old Christian friendships, which is beautiful. But it's not smooth sailing for a lot of people. It's really not a linear process. You know, you don't kind of travel along and tick the boxes and go, cool, right, me and God are sorted now. It's super messy. And there's been times in, you know, my own journey with God where we've had definite rough spots and we haven't been able to talk, sometimes for months, for years. And yes, worship and music have helped me at those times. But I think sometimes it's really simple, the stuff that can help us. Things like, you might laugh, but things like chocolate, things like, I have a point with this, I promise.
Okay.
Being out in nature for me.
That's a biggie. Yeah, definitely.
Having a cuddle with my cat, you know, who surprisingly has not made a cameo appearance during our conversation.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to meet.
Yeah, sometimes she does. But those things, they don't sound necessarily spiritual or Christian. But my thinking there is they don't have to be. Sometimes it's about rediscovering joy and just doing nice things for the heck of it, just doing nice stuff for us because we can. And sometimes that's just us being kind to ourselves. And sometimes that's a little back door that the Holy Spirit can sometimes sneak in by. You know, he doesn't always come in the front door. Sometimes he's popping in through a side window or something. But I find that often he can use something really simple, like, you know, a walk by the lake, or a single piece of really good chocolate, or a chat with an old friend. And we don't have to do anything God related, don't have to talk explicitly about God, but that joy and creating some kind of space to just sit and just be, there's something in that that's really important.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to seem like I'm sort of diminishing the whole idea of self-nurture and you know, giving yourself something that you know is pleasurable and you know, shows regard for yourself. That's extremely important.
I think it can, and I think God sometimes meets us in those spaces. I don't know about others, but you know, when I'm walking in nature, I find it's super easy to talk to God for some reason. I have no idea why. I don't know what that's about, but some of my most memorable conversations with him have been in like gardens, you know, botanical gardens or national parks, places like that.
I think a lot of people share that. That's a
right
thing,
right. My theory, this is just Steph's theory, is that it's about just creating that kind of space. And sometimes it's just communing with God. He doesn't necessarily have to say anything to me, and I don't always want words either. You know, sometimes we're like, God, why? You know, give me an answer, give me some clarity, God. But often it's not words that I need. It's his companionship. And it's a sense of his nearness and his joining me in suffering without having to ruin it with words. I tell you the image that's in my head as I think about this. If you've ever read Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, there's a moment in The Magician's Nephew, the first in the series in terms of storytelling. And there's a moment where, you know, this young boy Diggory has gone to this magical world of Narnia and met up with Aslan. And of course, it's all very allegorical. You know, Aslan is a bit of a Christ-like figure, and there's all that, you know, lovely meaning and nuance to it. But Diggory's kind of preoccupied with his mum back in the real world, who's sick. She's bedridden. She's on some horrible medications. She's not sleeping. And he's so worried about his mum, and Aslan sends him on this adventure and this quest, and, you know, bring me an apple from this garden and go find it on the top of this hill, and, you know, and they have to face hunger and dangers and temptation, and he's triumphant. Diggory returns with the much awaited apple, and gives it to Aslan, and there's this moment where he kind of, they're talking about all this other stuff, and Diggory's looking down and he's going, well, yes, sir, but please, isn't there anything you can do for my mum? and he's crying and he's just heartbroken because he's like, all of this is wonderful, but my mum's still sick in bed. Like nothing's being done for my mum. And he goes to Aslan because he figures if anyone can help my mum, it's Aslan, but he can't look up at Aslan. He's got his face down and he's crying and he says, please, is there something you can do for my mother? And then finally he lifts his head and he looks up, and to his complete surprise, he sees that Aslan's eyes are filled with tears. And that's such a moment for me to remember that when I'm in a really horrible place, when I'm feeling that grief and that overwhelm and that sorrow, that God's not kind of sitting there going, come on, pick up your socks, up you get, pop to it, get more disciplined, read your Bible, have your prayer, but that he's actually sitting there with me, feeling that sorrow with me, empathizing and being vulnerable with me. To remember the tears in Aslan's eyes, for me, that's a message of God's willingness to be vulnerable with us and for us. I mean, you think about Jesus on the cross, like that's vulnerability.
Really?
When we talk about vulnerability, like what Jesus went through, I can only imagine what that's like.
Yes.
But God is willingly stepping into our suffering with us, not standing far off and going, oh, come on now, you're letting me down now. You're letting down the team. You're looking all sad and stuff. What will people think of Christians? What will people think of Jesus when they see you? It's just like some kind of spiritual paranoia. I don't know where that comes from. But he's actually sitting beside us, maybe with an arm around us and going, I know, I get it. I get it. This sucks. This is horrible. I'm not going to leave you.
It's not always easy to be sure about that. I mean, feelings and emotions are very unreliable, and sometimes you feel like loved and supported by a God who entered into the human state and died for us, and sometimes you don't. But all the same, that is something that is really at the heart of coming to terms with any difficult struggle in the Christian journey, I think. Absolutely.
I think so. And there's time. There's time for reconciliation with God. There's no deadline. There's no hurry. There's space and there's grace. It stretches all around the world for us, and us needing a bit more time. I don't think it puts God off. Like, I think we get this idea that he's kind of rolling his eyes and going, oh, come on, like, honestly, but I know in my own faith, in my own walk with God, he's been just ridiculously patient, like way more patient than me. For me, like I tend towards the impatient side of things. I'm like, come on, this book hasn't been published yet. Let's get it out. For me, patience means, when I stand in a queue at the supermarket, I refrain from checking the time. That's patience, But God's way more patient than even that, even though that's pretty heroic. But God he waits for years for us to even kind of turn around and go, oh, maybe God, maybe one day. Not now, not today, God, but maybe sometime. One day. Maybe, And that's what grace is. There's grace that's like a safety net beneath us all this time, and sometimes we're terrified of falling and not being caught. What happens if I fall? There's nothingness beneath me, and there's this safety net. It's often invisible. We can't see it, right?
Yes.
But God's grace is waiting like a safety net underneath all of us, and it's ready in case we need it. And sometimes that means that we take our time. And, I never thought God was that gracious, but he was patient with me. He might be patient with other people too.
Well, thank you very much for expressing, giving insights for, not just childless people, but everyone who encounters your work into that kind of infinite patience and love, and giving people the sense that that they are enough, they are loved by God. it will be
Yep.
okay. In the end, everything will be okay.
That's the bottom line of my book, is there is life after childlessness, and hope, and sometimes even faith. There can be room for that too, even after childlessness.
On that note, thank you very much indeed. And
thanks for having me.
that was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.